For as long as Evelyn Hart could remember, her life had been governed by rules that never made sense. Some children grew up with curfews. Some were told to stay away from trouble. But Evelyn's grandmother had built an entire life around restrictions that felt larger than ordinary caution. She was not allowed to date. She was not allowed to travel outside the state of Missouri. She was not allowed to share personal information with strangers. She was not allowed to post photographs online. Most importantly, she was never allowed to ask questions about her parents. Every time she tried, her grandmother's face changed. Fear replaced warmth. Silence replaced answers. By the time Evelyn turned 18, she had stopped asking, at least outwardly. Inside, the questions never disappeared. They only grew stronger. The town of Ashford was small enough that everyone knew everyone else. Nestled among rolling fields and aging storefronts, it was the kind of place where people spent their entire lives without ever leaving. For most residents, that felt comforting. For Evelyn, it felt like a prison. Every morning she woke to the same streets, the same faces, the same routines. Every night she stared through her bedroom window and wondered what existed beyond the horizon. Freedom had become an obsession, not because she hated her life, because she felt as though she had never truly lived it. Her grandmother, Margaret Hart, had raised her since infancy. Margaret was respected throughout town. She attended church every Sunday. She volunteered at community events. She helped neighbors whenever they needed assistance. To everyone else, she appeared calm and dependable. But Evelyn knew a different version. The version who checked every lock twice before bed. The version who became nervous whenever unknown cars entered town. The version who sometimes sat awake until dawn staring out the living room window, always watching, always waiting, as if danger might appear at any moment. Evelyn often wondered what kind of fear could survive for 18 years. Whatever it was, it had never left Margaret. One rainy afternoon during her senior year of high school, Evelyn returned home earlier than expected. The house was unusually quiet. Margaret had gone into town for groceries. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn found herself completely alone. She wandered through the old farmhouse, searching for something to occupy her attention. That was when she noticed the bedroom door. Her grandmother's room was always closed. Always. The realization sparked something dangerous inside her. Curiosity. She told herself she was only looking. Nothing more. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old books. Everything was neat. Everything was organized. Everything looked exactly as she expected, until she noticed something unusual beneath the bed. A corner of dark metal, almost hidden, almost invisible. Evelyn knelt and pulled it forward. A small black lockbox emerged from the shadows. Her heartbeat quickened. She knew immediately that whatever answers existed in this house were inside that box. The lock itself was old. Rust clung to the edges. Years of secrecy sat behind that thin layer of steel. For several minutes, she simply stared. Part of her wanted to push it back where she found it. Part of her knew she never would. After searching the room, she eventually discovered a tiny key hidden inside a jewelry box. The moment the lock clicked open, something shifted inside her. A line had been crossed. There was no going back. Inside were dozens of yellowed envelopes, stacks of documents, several photographs, and one leather folder bound with fading string. The photographs caught her attention first. Most showed people she had never seen before. Men in expensive suits, women wearing elegant dresses, grand buildings, luxury cars. Nothing connected to the life she knew. Then she found the photograph, the one that made her blood run cold. A baby girl sat on a blanket. Beside her sat an infant boy. The girl was unmistakably Evelyn. Even as a baby, the resemblance was obvious. The boy, however, was a stranger. Yet something about the photograph felt important, intentional, as if someone wanted them remembered together. On the back, written in fading ink, were only 3 words. The promise begins. Evelyn read them twice, then 3 times. The words made no sense, but they felt significant. Like the first piece of a puzzle she didn't understand. She set the photograph aside and opened one of the envelopes. Inside were letters. Hundreds of letters. Most had never been opened. Many came from New York. Several carried the same surname, Moretti. The name appeared again and again. Moretti, Moretti, Moretti. It meant nothing to Evelyn, yet her grandmother had preserved every single letter, as though they mattered, as though they were dangerous. A growing sense of unease settled over her. Then she opened the leather folder. Everything changed. Inside rested a single contract. Its paper had aged with time. Its edges were brittle. The signatures at the bottom were faded but still readable. Evelyn stared at the date, her birth date, the very day she entered the world. Confusion quickly turned into disbelief. Her own name appeared throughout the document, not because she had signed it, because someone else had signed it for her. Paragraph after paragraph described obligations, protections, agreements, and responsibilities. Most of it sounded legal and impossible to understand, until she reached one particular sentence. The words seemed to leap off the page. The child known as Evelyn Hart shall remain under protection and future claim of the Moretti family. Evelyn stopped breathing. Future claim. What did that even mean? She continued reading. The answer only made things worse. Another name appeared repeatedly throughout the contract. A specific heir. A designated beneficiary. A future head of the family. Damian Moretti. The name sent a chill through her. She had never heard it before. Yet every page seemed connected to him. The agreement wasn't temporary. It wasn't symbolic. According to the document, her future had been decided before she could walk, speak, or understand the world around her. Someone had made promises using her life. Someone had planned her future, and no one had ever told her. The realization struck harder than grief, harder than anger. Her entire identity suddenly felt uncertain. Was every rule her grandmother imposed connected to this? Was that why she couldn't leave the state? Was that why strangers were avoided? Was that why questions about her parents were forbidden? A terrible possibility emerged. Maybe the accident that killed her parents wasn't an accident at all. The thought refused to leave. She searched deeper into the box. More documents, more letters, more references to the Moretti family. Everything pointed toward power, influence, money, control, the kind of influence ordinary people only saw in movies. And somehow her name was tied to all of it. Outside, thunder echoed across the fields. Rain struck the windows. The peaceful farmhouse suddenly felt smaller, less safe. For the first time in her life, Evelyn realized she might know absolutely nothing about the people who raised her or the people who created her. The sound of tires crunching on gravel shattered the silence. Her grandmother was home. Panic surged through her. She hurriedly gathered the documents, but one paper slipped from her hands. The contract landed open on the floor. Her eyes caught a final sentence near the bottom, a sentence she had somehow missed, a sentence that changed everything. According to the agreement signed on the day of her birth, Evelyn Hart legally belonged to Damian Moretti. And at that exact moment, the front door opened, while Evelyn Hart stood frozen in her grandmother's bedroom, staring at a contract that seemed to rewrite her entire existence. Hundreds of miles away, another life was moving toward a collision course neither of them could yet see. New York City never truly slept. Even at 3 a.m, the skyline glowed with restless energy. Cars flowed through the streets like rivers of light. Business deals were made behind closed doors. Fortunes changed hands while most of the city remained unaware. And above it all sat Damian Moretti. At 32 years old, Damian had become one of the most powerful men on the East Coast. Officially, he was a businessman. His name appeared on corporate documents, charity boards, luxury real estate projects, and international investment portfolios. Financial magazines described him as brilliant. Television networks called him influential. Politicians shook his hand whenever cameras were nearby. To the public, Damian Moretti represented success. But public perception was merely a carefully crafted mask. The truth existed beneath the surface. The truth was far more dangerous. Behind the legitimate businesses stood an empire built over generations. Shipping ports, private security firms, nightclubs, casinos, transportation networks, warehouses, construction companies. Every major operation produced enormous wealth. And every dollar strengthened the influence of the Moretti organization. Within criminal circles, Damien's name carried a different meaning. Fear. Absolute fear. Criminal groups from Boston to Miami knew exactly who he was. His decisions affected entire markets. His alliances shaped power structures. His enemies rarely remained enemies for long. Most disappeared. Some vanished financially. Others vanished permanently. Nobody could predict which fate Damien would choose. That uncertainty made him terrifying. Inside a penthouse overlooking Manhattan, Damien stood before a wall of glass windows. The city stretched endlessly below him. To most people, the view would have felt inspiring. To Damien, it was simply another battlefield. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. One of his senior advisors entered the room carrying a tablet. Several files appeared on the screen. Financial reports, intelligence updates, security assessments, the daily realities of managing an empire. Damien reviewed each document with cold efficiency. Nothing escaped his attention. Every number mattered. Every movement mattered. Every threat mattered. Because threats were increasing. For months, rival organizations had been growing bolder. Smaller groups were forming unusual alliances. Competitors were testing boundaries they had never dared approach before. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Someone was preparing for war, and Damien intended to discover who. Unlike many powerful men, he wasn't driven by arrogance. He was driven by calculation. That made him far more dangerous. Arrogance created mistakes. Calculation created victories. Across the city, powerful figures secretly discussed his downfall. They met in private clubs, luxury hotels, exclusive restaurants. Every conversation revolved around the same question: how could Damien Moretti be removed? The answer remained frustratingly elusive. His organization was disciplined. His finances were protected. His security network was unmatched. Most importantly, his loyalty was earned rather than purchased. People followed him because they believed in him. That made betrayal difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. As the weeks passed, pressure continued building. Yet surprisingly, his greatest source of frustration didn't come from enemies. It came from his own family. Specifically, the constant conversations about marriage. Every family gathering eventually returned to the same topic: marriage, legacy, children, future heirs. The Moretti bloodline had survived for generations. Older relatives viewed marriage as a responsibility rather than a choice. Damien viewed it differently. He refused every proposal, rejected every introduction, ignored every carefully arranged meeting. Dozens of powerful families had attempted to connect themselves to the Moretti name. None succeeded. His refusals puzzled everyone. Many assumed he simply wasn't interested. Others believed he was too focused on business. A few whispered darker theories. But nobody knew the real reason. Because hidden inside a private safe in Damien's office rested a document no one else had ever seen. A contract. Old. Worn. Protected for nearly 2 decades. The same contract Evelyn had discovered only hours earlier. Every few months, Damien would open the safe and examine it. Not because he needed to, because he couldn't stop himself. The paper represented a promise made long before either of them had a voice in the matter. A promise tied to a little girl named Evelyn Hart. A girl he had never met. A girl who had somehow remained at the center of his life despite her complete absence from it. Most people would find that strange, perhaps even obsessive. But the truth was far more complicated. Damien had known about Evelyn since childhood. Her name had existed in family conversations for years. At first, she was merely part of an agreement, a future responsibility, a distant obligation. Nothing more. Yet as the years passed, curiosity grew, then concern, then something harder to define. The strangest part was that he had never attempted to claim her. He could have. Legally, financially, practically. Every mechanism existed, yet he never used them. Instead, he chose distance, protection from afar. Because the moment he learned what had happened to Evelyn's parents, everything changed. He realized the agreement had become dangerous. Someone had wanted the original promise erased. Someone had already killed to make that happen. Bringing Evelyn into his world too early might have signed her death warrant. So Damien made a different choice. He watched, quietly, carefully, for years, without her knowledge, without ever meeting her, without asking for anything in return. Private investigators monitored threats. Financial records were occasionally reviewed. Background checks were performed on people entering her life. Dangerous individuals were quietly redirected whenever they came too close. Not because he owned her, not because he expected gratitude, because somewhere deep inside, he had accepted responsibility for her safety, even if she never knew, even if she hated him someday, even if she chose to walk away forever. The responsibility remained. That realization raised a disturbing question. How many moments in Evelyn's life had been shaped by an invisible protector she never knew existed? How many dangers had disappeared before she ever noticed them? The answer would have terrified her, because the list was longer than anyone imagined. One particularly dangerous incident surfaced in Damien's memory. Several years earlier, a man connected to organized crime had briefly entered Ashford. His movements attracted attention. Questions were asked. Information was gathered. The man disappeared 3 days later. He never returned. Evelyn never knew why. There were others, too many others. Every threat removed before reaching her doorstep. Every risk neutralized before becoming visible. The irony was almost cruel. She spent her entire life believing she was trapped by rules, never realizing those rules may have kept her alive. As midnight approached, Damien finally closed the safe. The contract disappeared once more into darkness. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass. Inside, an unusual feeling settled over him. Restlessness, the kind that arrived before major events. Years of experience had taught him to trust instincts, and his instincts were screaming. Something had changed. Somewhere. He just didn't know what. Yet, a sudden vibration interrupted his thoughts. His phone, the secure line. Only a handful of people possessed that number. Damien answered immediately. The voice on the other end sounded tense. Urgent. Unusual. That alone was enough to command attention. Several seconds passed in silence as he listened. Then his expression hardened. The room seemed colder, more dangerous. The caller delivered only a few sentences. But those sentences changed everything. For nearly 18 years, Evelyn Hart had remained hidden, protected, untouched, unknown. Now that protection had been breached. Someone had reached her. Someone had discovered the truth. Someone else knew about the contract. For the first time in years, genuine alarm crossed Damien Moretti's face. Because whoever found Evelyn first was never supposed to find her at all. And according to the intelligence report arriving from Missouri, they were already moving toward her. The document in Evelyn Hart's trembling hands refused to leave her thoughts. For days after discovering the contract hidden beneath her grandmother's bed, every detail replayed inside her mind. The faded signatures, the unfamiliar legal language, the strange promise attached to her name before she had even taken her first breath. More disturbing than the contract itself was the name attached to it. Damien Moretti, a man she had never met, a man who somehow possessed a connection to her life that stretched back to the day she was born. As questions multiplied, Evelyn found herself surrounded by fragments of a story nobody had wanted her to know. Old newspaper clippings, hidden financial records, family photographs with faces partially torn away, letters written in coded language. Each piece pointed toward one undeniable truth. Her life had not begun in a quiet American town. It had begun in the middle of a war, and the deeper she searched, the more horrifying that war became. 20 years earlier, long before Evelyn existed, two powerful criminal dynasties controlled enormous portions of the East Coast. The Moretti family ruled ports, shipping routes, construction contracts, and countless businesses hidden behind legitimate corporations. Their influence stretched from New York to Boston. Across the same territory stood another organization, equally powerful and equally dangerous. For years, the two groups existed in a fragile balance. Neither side trusted the other. Neither side wanted peace. The slightest mistake could trigger bloodshed across multiple states. Small disputes became violent confrontations. Violent confrontations became assassinations. Assassinations became open warfare. By the time federal authorities began noticing unusual patterns, dozens of people had already disappeared. Entire neighborhoods lived under silent fear. Business owners paid protection money simply to survive. Families avoided speaking certain names aloud. The conflict had become so destructive that even those leading it struggled to control the violence. Then something happened that nobody expected. A single act of courage changed everything. At the center of that moment stood Evelyn's father, Nathan Hart. Unlike many people connected to organized crime, Nathan had never wanted power. He had grown up around dangerous men, but refused to become one of them. Intelligent and ambitious, he spent years trying to distance himself from the world that surrounded his family. Unfortunately, escaping such a world proved nearly impossible. Blood ties created obligations. Obligations created risks. And risks followed people forever. One winter night, a violent ambush changed the course of history. Several gunmen attacked a convoy belonging to the Moretti family. The target was Damien's father, Alessandro Moretti. According to hidden records Evelyn uncovered, Alessandro would have died that night, but Nathan Hart intervened. The exact details remained unclear. Some reports claimed he distracted the attackers. Others suggested he physically pulled Alessandro from a vehicle moments before it exploded. Whatever happened, one fact remained consistent across every version. Nathan Hart saved Alessandro Moretti's life. That act shocked both families. Enemies were not supposed to save one another. Yet Nathan had done exactly that. For the first time in years, influential figures from both organizations sat down together, not to plan another attack, to negotiate peace. The agreement that emerged remained secret from almost everyone involved. Officially, business arrangements were created, territories were divided, financial partnerships were established. Unofficially, something much more significant occurred. A pact, a promise, a guarantee that future generations would remain united. The architects of the agreement believed loyalty built through blood was stronger than loyalty built through money. And so an extraordinary contract was drafted. If children were born into both families, they would eventually be joined together. Not immediately, not forcibly, but symbolically. The union would serve as proof that peace remained intact. It would prevent future wars. It would bind both bloodlines permanently. When Evelyn discovered this history, she felt physically ill. Her entire existence had been discussed years before her birth. People she had never met had made decisions that affected her future. The realization felt suffocating. Every dream she had ever possessed suddenly seemed connected to choices made by strangers. Yet the truth became even darker, because the peace never lasted. Hidden deep within old records, Evelyn uncovered evidence of betrayal. Someone inside the alliance had secretly undermined the agreement. At first, the sabotage appeared small. Financial discrepancies, missing shipments, anonymous threats. Then violence returned. Not openly, not publicly, quietly, strategically. People began disappearing. Witnesses changed stories. Investigations stalled. The fragile trust between both families started collapsing. Someone wanted the peace destroyed. Someone wanted war. And that person operated from within. This discovery led Evelyn toward another devastating truth. Her parents had known. Nathan Hart and her mother, Caroline, eventually realized powerful forces were manipulating events behind the scenes. They understood that remaining connected to either organization would place their future children in danger. So they made a choice. They decided to leave. Completely. They abandoned business interests, cut communication, move away from old contacts, attempted to build a normal life far from the influence of both families. For a short time, it appeared successful. They settled into a quieter environment, started creating a future independent from criminal power. Then Evelyn was born. According to official records, her parents seemed happy. Photographs showed smiles. Neighbors described a loving young family. Everything appeared normal, but appearances often concealed reality, especially in stories like theirs. Within months of Evelyn's birth, something changed. Unusual bank activity appeared. Unknown vehicles were reportedly seen near their home. Anonymous phone calls became frequent. Someone had found them. Someone knew where they were hiding. Evelyn's grandmother had hinted at these events throughout her life without ever explaining them. Now the pieces finally fit together. The fear, the strict rules, the isolation. None of it had been random. It had been preparation, protection, survival. Then came the event that shaped Evelyn's entire childhood. The accident. Officially, Nathan and Caroline Hart died when their vehicle lost control during heavy rain. Authorities concluded it was tragic but ordinary. Case closed. No criminal investigation. No suspicious findings. No further questions. For years, Evelyn accepted that explanation. She had been too young to know otherwise. But hidden documents told a different story. A mechanic's report disappeared before reaching investigators. Witness statements vanished. Insurance files contained contradictory information. Most alarming of all, photographs from the wreck revealed damage inconsistent with a simple accident. The evidence suggested something terrifying. The crash may never have been an accident. It may have been murder. Evelyn stared at the photograph for hours. Every image shattered another piece of the life she thought she understood. Her parents had not abandoned her. They had not made reckless decisions. They had been hunted and possibly killed. A powerful emotional realization struck her harder than anything else. Everything she remembered about her childhood existed because her grandmother had sacrificed her own life to protect her. The strict rules that once felt cruel suddenly looked different. Every warning, every restriction, every fearful glance toward unfamiliar cars. Her grandmother had known danger remained alive. She had simply never explained why. An unsettling thought settled into Evelyn's mind. How many times had she been protected without realizing it? How many threats had been stopped before reaching her? How many secrets had been buried to keep her alive? The answers became even more disturbing when she discovered information about Damien Moretti. For years, Damien had believed she was dead. After the accident, false reports spread through criminal networks. Several records indicated no surviving child existed. Others claimed the entire Hart family had perished. The confusion persisted for decades. Damien grew up assuming the promised child connected to the peace agreement had disappeared forever. The contract became nothing more than a relic, a symbol of a failed alliance, a reminder of a war nobody truly won. Yet somehow someone had recently uncovered the truth. Someone discovered Evelyn survived. Someone located her. And that discovery triggered everything now unfolding around her. The implications terrified her. If people were searching for her today, then the past was not buried. It was active, moving, watching, waiting. Evelyn spent night after night examining documents spread across her bedroom floor. Names connected to names. Dates connected to events. Patterns emerged. A hidden network stretched through decades of history. Then she found something unexpected. One particular name appeared repeatedly. Not in headlines, not in public reports, in confidential notes, private correspondence, financial records. The same individual surfaced again and again whenever suspicious events occurred, whenever witnesses disappeared, whenever investigations ended abruptly, whenever violence benefited certain people. The pattern became impossible to ignore. This person had likely played a role in destroying the alliance, possibly even in orchestrating the deaths of her parents. Yet according to available records, that individual was never punished, never exposed, never eliminated. In fact, they appear to have grown more powerful over time. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. The realization carried enormous consequences. For years, she believed the people responsible for her family's suffering were long gone, dead, forgotten, buried by history. Instead, the evidence suggested something far worse. One of the architects behind the betrayal remained alive, still operating, still protected, still dangerous. And if that person learned Evelyn had uncovered the truth, her life could be in greater danger than ever before. As dawn approached, Evelyn organized the final stack of documents. The story finally made sense. The promise had never been about romance. It had never been about destiny. It had never been about forcing two strangers into marriage. It was a desperate attempt to prevent bloodshed, a political agreement disguised as a family bond, a peace treaty written through future generations. And someone had destroyed it. Someone had murdered for it. Someone had spent 20 years ensuring the truth remained buried. But now Evelyn knew enough to become a threat. And somewhere beyond the safety of her small town life, the person connected to her parents' deaths was still alive, still powerful, and beginning to realize that the little girl they thought had disappeared forever had finally started asking questions. The discovery changed everything. For most of her life, Evelyn Hart had lived inside a carefully controlled world, a small town, predictable routines, familiar faces, quiet streets where everybody knew each other's names. Now she understood that life had been an illusion. The documents she uncovered proved that powerful people had shaped her future long before she was old enough to understand it. Worse still, someone connected to her parents' deaths might still be alive. That realization made her dangerous. And dangerous people attracted attention, especially in the world of Damien Moretti. Only 3 days after uncovering the truth about her family's past, Evelyn noticed something unusual. A black SUV parked across from her grandmother's house. It remained there for hours. The following day, another vehicle appeared. Then another. Different drivers. Different license plates. The same silent observation. Her grandmother noticed it too. Fear returned to the older woman's eyes. The kind of fear Evelyn remembered from childhood. The kind that appeared whenever unexpected visitors came town. The kind that suggested old nightmares were waking up again. That night, Evelyn barely slept. Every sound outside her window seemed louder. Every passing vehicle felt suspicious. By morning, everything changed. A black luxury sedan stopped in front of the house. 2 men stepped out. Neither looked like criminals. Both wore expensive suits. Both carried themselves with professional confidence. Yet something about them felt intimidating, controlled, disciplined, dangerous. They weren't there to ask questions. They were there for a purpose. Within minutes, Evelyn learned exactly what that purpose was. Damien Moretti had found her. The news landed like a thunderbolt. For weeks she had searched for information about him. Now the most feared man connected to her family's past had reached her first. The message delivered through his representatives was surprisingly simple. Someone else was searching for her. Someone dangerous. Someone connected to events that happened 20 years earlier. Remaining in her hometown was no longer safe. The Moretti organization could protect her, but only if she came to New York immediately. Evelyn wanted answers. Instead, she found herself stepping directly into the center of a world she barely understood. 2 days later, a private jet carried her toward New York City. The experience felt surreal. She had never flown privately, never sat in seats more expensive than her family's car, never watched clouds pass beneath her, while armed security personnel quietly monitored every detail of the journey. The contrast between her old life and this new reality felt overwhelming. Hours later, New York appeared beneath the aircraft. Endless buildings, endless lights, endless power. And somewhere inside that city waited Damien Moretti, the man connected to her life before she was even born. The drive from the airport introduced her to another level of wealth entirely. Luxury vehicles surrounded the convoy. Security teams communicated through earpieces. Routes appeared carefully planned. Nothing happened accidentally. Nothing happened without approval. Every movement felt orchestrated, as if the city itself adjusted around Damien's presence. Then Evelyn saw this state. Calling it a mansion felt inadequate. The property resembled a private kingdom hidden behind enormous gates. Stone walls stretched across multiple acres. Security cameras monitored every entrance. Armed guards patrolled discreetly. Elegant gardens surrounded structures larger than some hotels. The estate represented power without apology, money without limits, influence without boundaries. For someone raised in modest circumstances, the sight was almost impossible to comprehend. As the gates opened, Evelyn realized she had crossed into a different world, a world governed by different rules, a world where ordinary people rarely entered, and where leaving might not be as simple as arriving. Inside, the scale became even more astonishing. Marble floors reflected crystal chandeliers. Historic artwork covered walls. Antique furniture occupied rooms larger than entire houses. Generations of wealth surrounded her from every direction. Yet beneath the luxury existed something darker. Control, Every hallway contained security measures. Every room had restricted areas nearby. Every employee moved with disciplined efficiency. The estate wasn't simply a home. It was a fortress, one designed to survive war. Evelyn met Damien that evening. The encounter was far different than she expected. Based on his reputation, she imagined someone loud and intimidating, someone eager to demonstrate power. Instead, Damien Moretti appeared calm, measured, dangerously composed. At 38 years old, he carried himself with quiet authority, the type of authority that never needed to announce itself. People simply obeyed. His presence filled every room without effort. Years of leadership had created an aura few people could ignore. For a brief moment, Evelyn understood why powerful men feared him, and why entire organizations followed his commands. What surprised her most was the way he looked at her, not as property, not as an obligation, but as a mystery. The same curiosity she felt toward him seemed reflected in his eyes. Neither fully understood the other, yet both understood their lives had become connected. The days that followed introduced Evelyn to the reality of the Moretti world. Mafia traditions existed everywhere. Family loyalty ranked above almost everything else. Respect wasn't requested. It was expected. Old customs survived despite modern wealth. Private gatherings operated according to unwritten rules. Business decisions carried consequences far beyond money. Every interaction possessed layers of meaning. Every conversation concealed hidden intentions. The culture fascinated and disturbed her simultaneously. Yet not everyone welcomed her arrival. In fact, many openly opposed it. Several members of the extended Moretti family viewed Evelyn as an outsider. To them, she represented a complication, a reminder of old agreements best forgotten. Some questioned her legitimacy. Others questioned her motives. A few questioned why Damien had brought her into their world at all. Their hostility became impossible to ignore, especially during family gatherings. The criticism rarely appeared direct. Instead, it emerged through subtle comments. Dismissive looks, polite insults disguised as concern, questions designed to highlight her background, where she grew up, how little money she had, how different she was from their social circles. One evening, during a formal dinner attended by influential families from New York's elite circles, the treatment became especially humiliating. The guests arrived dressed in designer clothing. They discussed investments worth millions, private islands, luxury developments, political connections. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat silently, aware that she belonged to none of those worlds. Several women examined her like an exhibit. Some smiled politely. Others barely concealed their judgment. One guest eventually asked where she attended preparatory school. When Evelyn admitted she attended public school in a small town, the table fell noticeably quieter. Another woman asked whether her family owned property. Evelyn explained that they rented most of their lives. Again, silence followed. The reaction said everything. In their eyes, poverty wasn't unfortunate. It was shameful, a weakness, a flaw. The emotional weight of those moments lingered long after the dinner ended. For the first time, Evelyn experienced a different form of prejudice, not based on race, not based on nationality, based on class, based on money, based on where society believed someone belonged. No matter how intelligent she was, no matter how brave she had become, many of these people saw only a poor girl who somehow wandered into their world, and they never intended to let her forget it. The experience hardened something inside her. She refused to let their judgment define her. If anything, it strengthened her determination, because unlike them, she understood struggle. She understood sacrifice. She understood survival. Things money alone could never teach. Meanwhile, media attention intensified. Rumors spread rapidly. Journalists discovered Evelyn's presence at the Moretti estate. Speculation exploded. News websites published articles questioning her connection to Damien. Social media created endless theories. Some claimed she was a secret fiancé. Others suggested she was part of a business alliance. Many assumed she was chasing wealth. Few knew the truth, and those who did remained silent. The pressure became exhausting. Every public appearance generated headlines. Every photograph sparked new rumors. Yet through it all, Damien remained strangely protective. He never explained everything, but he ensured her safety. He assigned security, restricted certain information from reaching the media, and quietly eliminated threats before they reached her. The more Evelyn observed him, the more complicated he became. The ruthless Mafia leader described in newspapers rarely matched the man she encountered privately. There were moments of surprising patience, unexpected intelligence, even kindness, not softness, never softness, but something human hidden beneath years of responsibility. Likewise, Damien found himself increasingly intrigued by Evelyn. Unlike most people around him, she wasn't impressed by wealth. She wasn't intimidated by status. She asked uncomfortable questions, challenged assumptions, refused to blindly accept explanations. For a man surrounded by people who constantly agreed with him, the experience felt refreshing. Neither acknowledged the growing curiosity between them, but both noticed it, and neither could fully ignore it. Weeks passed. During that time, Evelyn continued investigating her family's history. The estate contained extensive archives, generations of records preserved in secured rooms beneath the main residence, financial documents, correspondence, photographs, personal journals. Many remained inaccessible. Others required special authorization. Fortunately, Damien granted her limited access. What she discovered changed everything. The archives revealed details never included in public records, evidence of meetings between her father and senior Moretti members, references to the peace agreement, notes discussing concerns about betrayal, warnings ignored by powerful people. The deeper she searched, the more alarming the picture became. Someone inside the alliance had deliberately sabotaged peace efforts. Someone with influence. Someone trusted. Then Evelyn found a collection of private documents hidden inside an old storage cabinet. The files appeared insignificant at first. Routine correspondence, financial reports, meeting schedules. But one detail caught her attention: a signature. The same signature appeared repeatedly alongside suspicious decisions made shortly before her parents' deaths. Transactions, communications, orders. The pattern emerged quickly, too quickly to ignore. Her pulse accelerated. She compared names, compared dates, compared locations. Everything pointed toward a horrifying conclusion. The betrayal hadn't come from an outside enemy. It hadn't originated from a rival family. It had come from within. Someone connected directly to the Moretti organization had helped destroy the peace agreement. Someone connected to the Moretti organization had likely helped orchestrate the events leading to her parents' deaths. Evelyn stared at the evidence for nearly an hour, trying to convince herself she was mistaken, trying to find another explanation. But the documents refused to lie. The truth stood clearly before her, and it was far more dangerous than anything she imagined, because if the evidence was accurate, the person responsible wasn't just connected to the Moretti family. They were still part of it, still protected by it, still operating from inside its walls. And somewhere within the very mansion she now called home lived a person who betrayed her parents 20 years ago. The documents refused to leave Evelyn Hart's mind. Long after she left the archive room beneath the Moretti estate, the names, signatures, and financial records continued replaying inside her thoughts. Someone within the Moretti family had betrayed her parents. Someone within the organization had helped destroy a peace agreement that was supposed to prevent bloodshed. And if the evidence was accurate, that person was still alive, still powerful, still trusted. The realization transformed everything. For weeks, Evelyn had believed the enemy existed somewhere outside the family. A rival organization, a forgotten assassin, an old enemy seeking revenge. Now she understood a far more dangerous truth. Sometimes the greatest threats sat at the same dinner table. Sometimes betrayal wore a familiar face. And sometimes the people trusted most were the ones capable of causing the deepest wounds. The following morning, Evelyn requested a private meeting with Damien Moretti. The conversation took place inside his office, overlooking the Manhattan skyline. For several minutes, Damien studied the documents spread across his desk. His expression remained unreadable, but the silence growing between them felt increasingly heavy. The evidence was impossible to ignore. Several financial transfers connected suspicious individuals. Payments had been routed through shell companies. Money had disappeared before major acts of violence. Names repeatedly surfaced around key events leading to Evelyn's parents' deaths. Most disturbing of all, those transactions originated from accounts controlled by members of the Moretti organization. The implication was devastating. Someone on the inside had secretly funded the destruction of the alliance. Someone close to Damien had been working against his family for years. For the first time in a very long time, Damien found himself questioning people he had trusted his entire life. That realization unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Trust was the foundation of power. Without trust, organizations collapsed. Families turned against themselves. Empires crumbled. Yet the evidence sitting before him suggested that trust had already been broken years ago. Neither Damien nor Evelyn spoke much after that. The investigation began immediately. Quietly, carefully. Only a handful of people knew what they were searching for. Damien assigned his most loyal investigators to re-examine decades of financial records. Private communications were reviewed. Old security files resurfaced. Archive reports were analyzed again. Every transaction connected to Evelyn's parents became important. Every forgotten detail mattered. As days passed, troubling patterns emerged. Several respected figures within the organization appeared linked to unusual financial activity. Large sums of money had moved through hidden channels. Accounts had been opened and closed without explanation. Certain payments coincided almost perfectly with acts of violence from 20 years earlier. The deeper investigators looked, the worse things became. Multiple suspects emerged, trusted advisors, longtime allies, even distant relatives. Each discovery created new questions. Each answer revealed additional layers of deception. Meanwhile, tension spread throughout the Moretti family. People noticed unusual meetings. Whispers circulated through hallways. Rumors traveled faster than facts. Some believed law enforcement had reopened old investigations. Others suspected rival organizations were preparing attacks. Few knew the truth, but everyone sensed something was wrong. Family gatherings became increasingly uncomfortable. Conversations stopped whenever Damien entered a room. Relatives exchanged nervous glances. Long-standing friendships showed signs of strain. Years of loyalty suddenly seemed uncertain. Evelyn watched the changes carefully. For the first time, she realized how fragile power could be. The Moretti family appeared invincible from the outside, but beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to spread. One evening, another breakthrough arrived. Investigators discovered evidence of hidden payments made to a former dock worker named Samuel Pierce. At first glance, the payments seemed insignificant. Small amounts distributed over several years. Nothing extraordinary, until someone noticed the dates. Each payment aligned with major events surrounding the collapse of the peace agreement. Samuel Pierce had been present during several critical meetings 20 years earlier. More importantly, he was still alive. The discovery electrified the investigation. After weeks of searching, Damien's people finally located him living under a false identity in rural Pennsylvania. The elderly man initially refused to cooperate. Fear controlled him even after all these years. Fear powerful enough to survive decades. Fear powerful enough to silence truth. But eventually he spoke, and what he revealed shocked everyone. According to Samuel, the alliance between the Hart and Moretti families had never failed naturally. It had been deliberately sabotaged. A powerful insider manipulated both sides. False information was planted. Distrust was encouraged. Violence was secretly funded. Every step had been carefully designed to destroy peace. Samuel never knew the mastermind's full plan, but he remembered one crucial detail. The person behind everything belonged to the Moretti family. The statement sent shockwaves through the organization. Now there was a witness, a living witness, someone capable of confirming what the records suggested, someone capable of exposing the truth. Unfortunately, the truth came with consequences. 3 days later, Samuel Pierce was found dead. Officially, authorities ruled it natural causes. Privately, nobody believed that explanation. The timing was too perfect. The message too obvious. Someone was cleaning up loose ends. Someone knew the investigation was getting close. The pressure intensified. Damien became increasingly aggressive in his search for answers. Longtime associates faced questioning. Financial audits expanded. Private records were seized. Nobody received special treatment. Nobody remained above suspicion. For many family members, it was the first time they had ever seen Damien question his own blood. The situation became even more dangerous when media outlets began reporting unusual activity surrounding the Moretti organization. Anonymous leaks appeared online. Financial rumors circulated. Speculation regarding internal conflicts spread rapidly. News channels discussed possible corruption. Business partners grew nervous. Investors demanded reassurance. Public scandal threatened decades of carefully maintained influence. Someone wasn't merely hiding. Someone was actively fighting back. And they were willing to damage the entire organization to protect themselves. The emotional toll on Evelyn grew heavier each day. The deeper she dug into her parents' history, the more painful the truth became. For years, she had imagined their deaths as a tragic accident. Now she understood they had been victims of something much darker: greed, ambition, betrayal. A child should never have to discover that powerful people decided her parents were expendable. Yet, that was exactly what happened. One night, unable to sleep, Evelyn walked through the estate gardens alone. The property remained heavily guarded. Security personnel monitored every entrance. Surveillance systems covered every pathway. She should have been safe. But safety often creates complacency. And complacency creates opportunities. The attack happened without warning. A gunshot shattered the silence. The bullet struck a stone pillar inches from her head. Fragments exploded through the air. For a split second, Evelyn froze. Another shot followed. Then another. Security alarms erupted across the estate. Guards rushed toward the scene. The shooter disappeared into darkness before anyone could identify them. The assassination attempt lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet it changed everything. Someone wanted Evelyn dead. Not intimidated. Not silenced. Dead. The realization horrified everyone involved. Especially Damien. When he arrived moments later and saw how close she had come dying, something inside him shifted. The normally composed Mafia leader struggled to conceal his anger. For years, he had controlled violence, managed risks, calculated consequences. But seeing Evelyn nearly killed awakened something far more personal. From that night forward, his protectiveness became impossible to ignore. Additional security surrounded her. Travel restrictions increased. Schedules became tightly controlled. Every threat received immediate attention. Many people interpreted his behavior as strategic, a practical response to danger. Those closest to him knew better. This was no longer just about the investigation. It was about Evelyn, and everyone could see it. As weeks passed, evidence continued accumulating. One suspect after another was eliminated. Alibis checked out. Financial trails ended. Witness testimony failed. Until eventually only one name remained. One person connected every piece together. One person appeared repeatedly throughout decades of deception. The discovery stunned the entire family. Because nobody expected it. Not Damien. Not Evelyn. Not anyone. The traitor wasn't a distant relative. Wasn't an ambitious outsider. Wasn't a forgotten associate. The traitor was Victor Moretti, Damien's uncle, a man trusted by nearly everyone, a man who had spent decades presenting himself as loyal family leadership, a man who attended every celebration, every funeral, every important meeting. Victor had helped raise younger generations, guided business decisions, protected family interests, or at least that was what everyone believed. In reality, Victor had secretly orchestrated the destruction of the alliance years earlier. He viewed peace as weakness. He viewed cooperation as surrender. War created profits. Chaos created opportunities. And so he manipulated both families for personal gain. The revelation shattered the organization. People refused to believe it. Some denied the evidence entirely. Others broke down emotionally. Years of trust vanished overnight. Damien felt the betrayal more deeply than anyone. The man responsible for destroying Evelyn's family had stood beside him for years, smiled beside him, advised him, pretended to protect him. all while hiding the truth. Yet before Damien could confront him, Victor disappeared. Private jets vanished. Financial accounts emptied. Safe houses were abandoned. By the time security teams arrived, he was gone. The traitor had escaped, and he hadn't left alone. Hours later, a single message arrived. No demands, no explanations, only a photograph. A photograph showing Evelyn's grandmother bound to a chair inside an unknown location. Beneath the image appeared one chilling sentence. "If you want her alive, come find me." The city had always belonged to powerful men. Politicians believed they controlled it through laws. Business leaders believed they controlled it through money. Criminal organizations believed they controlled it through fear. But as another cold New York dawn approached, the illusion of control began collapsing. For years, Damien Moretti had maintained a fragile balance across the East Coast. Through influence, intelligence, and calculated force, he had kept rival organizations divided. His enemies feared him too much to unite. Now that fear was gone. The betrayal hidden inside his own family had accomplished something no outside enemy ever could. It had brought all of Damien's rivals together. And for the first time in years, the empire he had spent his entire life building stood on the edge of destruction. Meanwhile, Evelyn Hart faced a different nightmare. The traitor's escape had not only exposed dangerous secrets, it had also resulted in the kidnapping of someone she deeply cared about. The loss hit her harder than she expected. For years, she had searched for answers about her parents, her past, and the mysterious promise that had shaped her entire existence. Now she was discovering a painful truth. Sometimes finding answers came with a terrible price. As reports flooded into the Moretti estate, the situation worsened by the hour. Several businesses loyal to Damien were suddenly targeted. Supply routes disappeared. Warehouses were attacked. Financial accounts were frozen. Long-trusted partners began withdrawing support. The attacks appeared random at first. Then a pattern emerged. Someone had coordinated everything perfectly. The traitor knew every weakness inside the Moretti organization, every secret account, every protected route, every trusted contact. Years of carefully guarded information were now being used against Damien. What frightened his advisors most was not the scale of the attacks. It was the precision. This was not revenge. It was extermination. The goal was simple. Erase Damien Moretti completely. Across New York, whispers spread through criminal circles. Some believed Damien's reign was over. Others believed a new power was about to emerge. Everyone understood the same thing. A war had begun, and only one side would survive. As pressure mounted, political investigations suddenly appeared. Government agencies began examining businesses connected to Moretti operations. Journalists published damaging reports. Anonymous sources leaked confidential documents. Old scandals resurfaced. Former allies turned into public critics. The timing was impossible to ignore. Someone powerful had decided to join the attack. The war was no longer limited to criminal organizations. It had spread into politics, media, and finance. Every battlefield was active. Every weakness was exposed. Every enemy was moving at once. For the first time since taking control of the family empire, Damien found himself fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously. Yet none of those threats occupied his thoughts. His focus remained on Evelyn, because intelligence reports suggested she had become the primary target. The traitor understood something important. Destroying Damien's empire might hurt him. Destroying Evelyn would break him. That realization changed everything. For years, Damien had made decisions based on strategy. Every move served a larger purpose. Every sacrifice strengthened his position. Now logic began losing ground to something far more dangerous. Emotion, the same emotion he had spent his entire life suppressing. As Evelyn watched the chaos unfold, she noticed changes in him. His movements became more aggressive. His patience shortened. His decisions became increasingly personal. The cold leader feared across the East Coast was slowly disappearing. In his place stood a man fighting for someone he could not afford to lose. That transformation frightened Evelyn more than the war itself, because she understood what it meant. People became unpredictable when protecting those they loved, and unpredictable people often made devastating mistakes. Meanwhile, the kidnapped victim became a critical piece of leverage. The traitor understood Damien's psychology perfectly. Every few hours, new messages arrived, new threats, new demands, new warnings. The objective was obvious: force Damien into a trap, force him to choose his empire or the people he cared about, power or loyalty, survival or love. For most leaders, the decision would have been simple. Empires came first. Individuals could be replaced. But Damien was no longer thinking like a leader. That was exactly what his enemies had hoped for. As the conflict intensified, betrayals emerged inside the organization. Trusted soldiers vanished. Longtime associates switched sides. Hidden loyalties surfaced. Some chose money. Others chose fear. A few simply believed Damien's downfall was inevitable. Each departure weakened the foundation of the empire. Each betrayal strengthened the opposition. The Morty organization began bleeding from within. Yet despite everything, one fact remained unchanged. Damien refused to abandon Evelyn. Many advisors quietly urged him to create distance. They viewed her as a liability, a weakness, a distraction during the most dangerous period of his leadership. Their reasoning was logical: remove the target, reduce the pressure, increase the chances of survival. But logic no longer mattered. Evelyn had become part of his future, and Damien had already sacrificed too much to lose another person he cared about. As days passed, violence spread throughout the city. Explosions damaged strategic properties. Armed confrontations erupted across multiple neighborhoods. Entire networks collapsed overnight. Businesses connected to rival organizations suffered equally devastating losses. No one escaped unscathed. The war consumed everyone. The city itself became collateral damage. Citizens who knew nothing about criminal empires suddenly found themselves caught between competing powers. News channels reported rising unrest. Public officials demanded action. Federal agencies intensified investigations. Pressure continued mounting from every direction. Then came the worst development of all. The FBI officially entered the situation. For years, federal authorities had suspected Damien's involvement in various illegal activities. They lacked proof. Now the chaos created opportunities. Agents launched coordinated investigations. Search warrants appeared. Witnesses received protection. Former associates accepted deals. The walls began closing in. Damien now faced two enemies simultaneously: the criminal coalition, seeking his destruction, and federal authorities seeking his imprisonment. Either threat alone would have been dangerous. Together they became potentially fatal. The traitor could not have planned a more effective attack. Everything Damien built was collapsing at once. Yet despite overwhelming pressure, he continued searching for the kidnapped victim. Every resource, every contact, every remaining ally. Nothing else mattered. The search eventually produced results. A location surfaced: an abandoned industrial complex near the waterfront, far from public attention, easy to defend, difficult to escape. The perfect place for a final confrontation. Intelligence suggested the traitor had gathered remaining allies there. Rival organizations were providing protection. Armed personnel surrounded the area. The kidnapped victim remained alive. For now, everyone understood what the discovery meant. The war had reached its final chapter. Either Damien would win, or everything would end. As preparations began, Evelyn witnessed something unexpected. The empire that had once appeared invincible was exhausted. Men who had served Damien for years looked worn down. Resources were stretched thin. Losses had accumulated. Fear lingered beneath every conversation. The organization could still fight, but it was no longer the unstoppable force outsiders imagined. For the first time, Evelyn saw the human cost behind power. Empires required constant sacrifice, and eventually, sacrifice demanded payment. As darkness settled over the city, Damien prepared for what might become his last operation. His remaining advisors presented options: retreat, negotiate, surrender certain assets, preserve what remained. All reasonable strategies, all potentially effective. Damien rejected everyone because none guaranteed Evelyn's safety. At that moment, something became painfully clear. The war was no longer about territory. It was no longer about money. It was no longer about power. It was about one person, one promise, one future. A future Damien refused to lose. That realization forced him to confront a question he had avoided for months. What mattered more, the empire he inherited or the woman who had transformed his life? For years, the answer would have been obvious. Power. Always power. Power protected everything. Power created security. Power ensured survival. But standing at the edge of catastrophe, Damien finally recognized a truth he had spent years denying. Power meant nothing if there was no one left worth protecting. When the operation began, the city held its breath. Vehicles moved through the darkness. Teams advanced toward the waterfront. Federal agents monitored communications. Rival organizations prepared defenses. The traitor waited. Everyone understood the stakes. The outcome would reshape New York's underworld forever. Hours passed without clear information. Rumors spread rapidly. Conflicting reports emerged. Some claimed Damien had already won. Others claimed he had been killed. No one knew the truth. The confrontation itself unfolded beyond public view. Gunfire echoed across the industrial district. Explosions illuminated the night. Emergency services flooded nearby streets. Authorities established security perimeters. Chaos consumed the waterfront. Then suddenly everything went silent. The silence lasted hours. No verified reports emerged. No confirmed survivors appeared. Communication ceased entirely. Even members of the Moretti organization lost contact. Evelyn waited inside the estate surrounded by uncertainty. Every passing minute felt heavier than the last. The war that threatened to destroy New York had finally reached its conclusion, but nobody knew who remained standing. As dawn arrived, fragments of information slowly surfaced. Several rival leaders were confirmed dead. Key criminal networks had collapsed. Federal investigations expanded dramatically. The kidnapped victim had been rescued. The traitor's operation appeared destroyed. On paper, Damien had achieved victory. Yet one critical problem remained. No one could find him. Search teams scoured the waterfront. Allies checked safe houses. Contacts searched hospitals. Authorities reviewed surveillance footage. Nothing. No trace. No confirmed sighting. No communication. The man who had dominated New York's underworld for years had simply vanished. Hours became an entire day. Still nothing. Speculation spread quickly. Some believed he had been killed. Others believed he was hiding. A few suspected something even worse. Evelyn refused to accept any conclusion. She remembered every sacrifice, every risk, every promise. A man who had survived countless enemies would not disappear without reason. Yet deep inside, fear continued growing. For the first time since entering his world, she faced a possibility she had never fully considered, the possibility of losing him. Outside, the city slowly began recovering from the conflict. Inside, uncertainty consumed everything. The war was over. The enemy network was shattered. The kidnapped victim was safe. The empire still stood. But the man who had fought to protect it all was nowhere to be found. And as another long night settled over New York, Evelyn received a single anonymous envelope containing a photograph taken only hours earlier. The image showed Damien alive, but standing beside someone who should have been dead. The photograph changed everything. For nearly 24 days, New York had believed Damien Moretti was dead. His allies believed it. His enemies celebrated it. Federal investigators quietly closed active operations connected to him. Even members of his own organization had begun accepting reality that the most feared man on the East Coast had finally fallen. Yet the photograph told a different story. The image showed Damien standing beside an older man near a remote coastal property hundreds of miles from New York. The timestamp proved it had been taken only hours earlier. He was alive, and somehow his survival created even more questions than his disappearance. For Evelyn Hart, the photograph became both a blessing and a curse. Relief arrived first. The crushing grief that had consumed her for weeks suddenly loosened its grip. For the first time since the waterfront battle, she allowed herself to breathe, but relief quickly transformed into confusion. Why had Damien disappeared? Why had he allowed everyone, including her, to believe he was dead? And most importantly, who was the mysterious man standing beside him? The anonymous envelope contained no explanation, only a single address written beneath the image. Nothing more. Meanwhile, the Moretti organization was collapsing under uncertainty. Without Damien's leadership, powerful figures inside the organization began competing for control. Old alliances fractured. New ambitions surfaced. Men who had spent years following orders suddenly wanted authority for themselves. The resulting power struggle weakened everything Damien had built. Rival organizations noticed immediately. Territories once controlled by the Moretti family became vulnerable. Smuggling routes faced constant attacks. Business partnerships dissolved. Every day without Damien strengthened the perception that his empire was dying. Fear had protected the organization for decades. Now that fear was fading. Across New York, enemies moved aggressively. Many believed they had a rare opportunity. The opportunity to erase the Moretti legacy permanently. As tensions escalated, funeral preparations quietly continued. Officially, Damien remained missing. Legally, he could not yet be declared dead. But privately, many family members were preparing for the inevitable. A memorial service was scheduled. Political figures planned statements. Business leaders prepared public appearances. Even some longtime allies had accepted that Damien would never return. Evelyn attended the planning meetings in silence. The experience felt surreal. Every conversation treated Damien like a memory. Every decision assumed his story was over. Yet hidden inside her pocket was proof that he was still alive. Something inside her refused to share it. Not yet. Instinct told her the truth was bigger than anyone realized. The photograph was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. A puzzle that stretched back decades. A puzzle connected to her parents. A puzzle connected to the promise made before she was even born. Days later, another discovery emerged. Investigators searching through evidence recovered after the waterfront war uncovered encrypted financial records. Most appeared meaningless. At first glance, they looked like ordinary transactions. Then analysts noticed a pattern. Several payments had been moving through hidden accounts for over 20 years. The dates aligned with events connected to Evelyn's family. The amounts increased after her parents' deaths. Even more alarming, the accounts remained active. Someone was still funding operations connected to those murders. Someone who had never been exposed. Someone powerful enough to remain hidden for 2 decades. The revelation transformed the investigation. For years, everyone assumed the mystery ended with the traitor. Now evidence suggested something far worse. The traitor had merely been a servant. The real mastermind remained free. The realization sent shockwaves through everyone involved, especially Evelyn, because it meant her parents' killers had never truly been punished. The people responsible had simply hidden behind layers of deception, and somewhere out there, they were still watching, still waiting, still dangerous. As pressure mounted, the address included with the photograph became impossible to ignore. Eventually, Evelyn made a decision. She would follow the lead herself. Accompanied by a small team of trusted allies, she traveled north along the coastline. The journey took nearly 8 hours. Remote forests replaced crowded highways. Civilization gradually disappeared. The final destination sat hidden among cliffs overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. At first glance, the property appeared abandoned. Weathered walls, broken fencing, empty structures. Yet security systems concealed beneath the surface suggested otherwise. Someone had invested heavily in keeping the location hidden. The deeper the team explored, the more obvious the truth became. This was not an abandoned property. It was a secret safe house. One designed for people who wanted to disappear completely. Inside the main building, evidence of recent activity appeared everywhere. Food supplies, medical equipment, communication devices, vehicles hidden in underground storage. Most importantly, signs that Damien had been there. Recently, the discovery intensified Evelyn's determination. Every answer seemed just out of reach. Every clue revealed another layer of mystery. Then she found something unexpected. A collection of old documents stored inside a secured room. Many were decades old. Some carried names she recognized immediately. Others referenced people long believed dead. Among the records sat a file containing information about her parents. The contents changed everything. For years, she believed her parents were victims of a conspiracy tied to organized crime. That assumption was only partially true. The documents revealed something far more shocking. Her father had not merely saved Damien's father years earlier. He had uncovered evidence threatening several powerful figures operating behind both families. People with influence extending beyond criminal organizations. People connected to business empires, political networks, international financial institutions. The conspiracy surrounding her parents was much larger than anyone imagined. Their deaths had been arranged because they learned too much, and the people responsible still possessed extraordinary power. The hidden records identified one name repeatedly, a man who appeared in transaction reports, intelligence files, private communications, someone who had remained invisible throughout the entire story, someone nobody suspected, the mastermind, the true architect behind the betrayal, the person responsible for decades of suffering. The evidence was overwhelming. The realization left Evelyn shaken. Everything she believed about the past suddenly changed. The war, the betrayal, the contract, her parents' deaths, all connected to one individual operating from the shadows. An individual powerful enough to manipulate entire organizations without ever appearing publicly. But before she could process the full implications, movement outside interrupted the investigation. Vehicles approached the property. Armed personnel surrounded the area. The safe house had been discovered. Whoever controlled conspiracy knew they were there. The situation deteriorated rapidly. Yet before panic could spread, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. Damien Moretti, alive, healthy, and standing directly in front of her. For a moment, Evelyn simply stared. The grief, the uncertainty, the weeks of unanswered questions. Everything collided at once. The impossible reality stood before her. The man everyone believed dead had returned, but he looked different. The exhaustion visible in his eyes revealed a burden he had been carrying alone, a burden even greater than the war itself. As the safe house secured its perimeter, Damien finally explained his disappearance. The truth stunned everyone. The waterfront confrontation had uncovered evidence proving a hidden network existed beyond traditional criminal organizations. A network capable of infiltrating governments, corporations, law enforcement agencies, and financial institutions. The mastermind controlling Evelyn's parents' murder belonged to that network. If Damien had returned immediately after the war, both he and Evelyn would have become targets again. So he vanished deliberately. He allowed the world to believe he was dead. While hidden, he followed financial trails, recovered buried records, tracked surviving conspirators. Every day spent in isolation brought him closer to the truth, and every day increased the danger surrounding him. Most importantly, his disappearance protected Evelyn. The conspiracy shifted attention away from her once Damien seemingly vanished. For nearly a month, he carried the burden alone, accepting that she might hate him later, if it meant keeping her alive. The emotional weight of that decision hit Evelyn harder than any revelation before it. For the first time, she fully understood the sacrifices Damien had made. Not for power, not for reputation, not for his empire. For her. Everything he lost during those weeks had been intentional. His authority weakened, his organization fractured, his enemies advanced, his public legacy suffered. Yet he accepted every consequence because protecting her mattered more. That realization changed something inside Evelyn. Sometimes love was not measured by grand declarations. Sometimes it was measured by what a person willingly sacrificed when nobody was watching. As the team reviewed evidence collected during Damien's disappearance, the final pieces of the mystery finally connected. The mastermind had orchestrated multiple generations of violence, manipulated rival families, created conflicts, financed betrayals, ordered assassinations, controlled investigations. Even the accident that killed Evelyn's parents had been carefully planned years in advance. Nothing had been random. Nothing had been accidental. Every tragedy traced back to one source, one architect, one enemy. And now that enemy understood a terrifying truth. Damien and Evelyn finally knew everything, which meant the conspiracy faced extinction. As darkness settled over the coastal safe house, emergency communications suddenly activated. Multiple encrypted messages arrived simultaneously. Security teams scrambled. Analysts began decoding information. Within minutes, the results became clear. The mastermind had responded. A single statement appeared across every intercepted communication channel. Short, precise, terrifying. The message confirmed that the conspiracy was preparing one final operation, an operation designed not merely to eliminate Damien or Evelyn, but to destroy everyone connected to them, family members, allies, friends, anyone they loved. The threat was not a bluff. Intelligence reports confirmed coordinated movements across multiple states. Resources were being mobilized, assets activated, plans already underway. The final attack had begun, and this time, the enemy intended to leave nothing behind. As alarms echoed to the safe house and preparations for another battle commenced, Damien looked toward the horizon and realized the war he thought he had ended was only entering its most dangerous phase, because the mastermind was finally stepping out of the shadows, and the next move would decide the fate of everyone he had fought to protect. The final attack began before sunrise. Across multiple states, coordinated strikes targeted businesses, safe houses, financial accounts, and individuals connected to both Evelyn Hart and Damien Moretti. The mastermind had spent decades building a hidden network. Now that network was revealing itself completely. No more shadows. No more intermediaries. No more secrets. The enemy had chosen open war. Inside the coastal safe house, preparations unfolded rapidly. Security teams mobilized. Communication channels remained active. Every trusted ally received instructions. For the first time in years, Damien was not fighting to preserve an empire. He was fighting to protect a future. And that difference changed everything. Evelyn watched the operation from a command center. Only months earlier, she had been a young woman trapped inside a small-town life, searching for freedom without understanding why her family lived in constant fear. Now she stood at the center of a conflict decades in the making, a conflict that had begun before she was even born, a conflict connected to a promise nobody had properly explained, the promise that had shaped her entire existence. As reports continued arriving, one discovery stood above all others. Among the recovered files from a hidden conspiracy was a sealed package addressed directly to Evelyn. The package had remained hidden for more than 20 years. Its contents had survived murders, betrayals, wars, and countless attempts to erase the truth. Inside was a handwritten letter. The signature at the bottom stopped Evelyn's heart. It belonged to her father. For a long moment, she simply stared at the paper. The man she barely remembered. The man whose death had haunted her entire life. The man whose choices had unknowingly shaped her future. His words felt like a voice reaching across time. A final message preserved for the daughter he never had the chance to raise. As she read, decades of mystery slowly began unraveling. The letter revealed the truth behind the agreement signed on the day she was born. And the truth was nothing like she imagined. The promise had never been about ownership. It had never been about control. It had never been about forcing two strangers into marriage. The agreement existed for one reason only: protection. 20 years earlier, Evelyn's father had uncovered evidence proving that powerful figures were planning to eliminate anyone who threatened their growing influence. He understood his family would eventually become targets. He knew he might not survive. Most importantly, he knew his future child would inherit the danger. Faced with impossible circumstances, he made a difficult choice. He trusted only one family, the Morettis, not because they were powerful, not because they were feared, but because they honored their word. The agreement guaranteed that if anything happened to him, the Moretti family would protect his daughter at all costs. The promise was never a prison. It was a shield, a safeguard created by a father who knew enemies were already closing in. As Evelyn continued reading, tears blurred her vision. For years, she believed her life had been controlled by strangers. Now she understood something heartbreaking. Everything her father did came from love. Every difficult decision, every sacrifice, every secret. He never intended to take away her freedom. He was trying to preserve it. The emotional realization struck harder than any revelation before it. Because sometimes the people who love us most make choices we don't understand until years later. And sometimes those choices save our lives. The letter also contained another crucial piece of information: a location, a meeting place, and the identity of the mastermind's final hideout. For decades, the architect of conspiracy had remained invisible. Now he was finally exposed. The evidence connected everything: the murders, the betrayals, the corruption, the financial manipulation, the wars between families, the destruction of innocent lives. Every tragedy traced back to one individual who viewed people as pieces on a chessboard. Someone who believed power justified every crime. Someone who had spent 20 years hiding behind wealth and influence. The time for hiding was over. Within hours, Damien's remaining allies launched a coordinated operation. Law enforcement agencies simultaneously received evidence collected during the investigation: financial records, communication logs, witness testimony, international transactions. The mountain of proof was overwhelming. For the first time in decades, the mastermind could no longer manipulate the system. Justice was finally catching up. Yet everyone understood one dangerous reality: cornered enemies were often the most dangerous. The mastermind knew capture was inevitable, which made him unpredictable. As teams advanced toward the final location, reports confirmed increasing resistance. Private security forces protected the compound. Escape routes had been prepared. Evidence was being destroyed. The final battle was already beginning. Unlike previous confrontations, this one felt different. There was no uncertainty about what was at stake. No hidden agendas. No unanswered questions. Only truth. Only consequences. Only the final chapter of a story that began before Evelyn's birth. The operation unfolded over several tense hours. Authorities secured surrounding areas. Communication networks were disabled. Escape attempts failed. The conspiracy that had operated for decades began collapsing piece by piece. Eventually, the inevitable happened. The mastermind was found, not inside a fortress, not surrounded by an army, but alone. A man who had spent his life controlling others now faced the reality of his own defeat. The arrest itself made headlines around the world. News organizations exposed decades of corruption. Political careers ended overnight. Corporate empires collapsed. Criminal networks dissolved. The truth spread faster than anyone expected. For families affected by the conspiracy, justice arrived at last. For Evelyn, the victory felt strangely quiet. No celebration could return her parents. No arrest could erase years of pain. But knowing the truth brought something she had never possessed before: peace. The mystery that defined her life was finally over. Weeks later, formal investigations concluded. Remaining conspirators faced prosecution. Assets were seized. Records became public. Victims received long overdue answers. The hidden empire built on deception disappeared. Slowly, life began moving forward. For the first time in decades, both families sat together without suspicion, without fear, without secrets. Old wounds remained, but healing had finally begun. The reconciliation was not perfect. Years of pain could not vanish overnight. Yet something remarkable happened. People stopped focusing on the past. They started focusing on the future, and that future included choices. Real choices. Choices Evelyn had never truly possessed before. One evening, months after the conspiracy's collapse, Damien invited Evelyn to a quiet property overlooking the ocean. No security teams nearby. No advisors. No business meetings. No threats. Just silence. The kind of silence neither of them had experienced in years. The setting felt symbolic. For so long, their lives had been defined by obligations created by others. Promises made before they were born. Expectations they never chose. Now, for the first time, they stood completely free. Damien understood that freedom better than anyone, which was why he finally made the most important decision of his life. He let go, not physically, emotionally. He released the promise, released the obligation, released the agreement that had connected them since infancy. If Evelyn wanted to leave, she could. If she wanted another life, she could have it. If she wanted nothing to do with him, he would accept it. The choice belonged entirely to her. No contracts, no expectations, no debts, no promises, only freedom. And that freedom revealed the truth. Because once obligation disappeared, only genuine feelings remained. Evelyn finally understood the difference between being promised to someone and choosing someone. One was imposed, the other was earned. The realization answered the final question haunting her journey. Why had she survived when so many others hadn't? Why had her father trusted the Moretti family? Why had fate continued pulling her toward Damien despite every obstacle? The answer was surprisingly simple. Because the promise had worked. It protected her exactly as intended. Not perfectly, not without pain. But it kept her alive long enough to discover her own future. The promise never stole her freedom. It preserved it. Months later, surrounded by close family and trusted friends, Evelyn made a decision entirely on her own. She chose Damien. Not because of a contract, not because of family pressure, not because of history, because she loved him. The ceremony remained small and private. No political figures, no criminal alliances, no public spectacle. Just two people choosing each other freely. The simplicity made it meaningful. For years their story had been controlled by secrets. Now it belonged only to them. Time continued moving forward. Years passed. The shadows of the past gradually faded. The wars ended. The investigations concluded. The fear disappeared. A family began growing where conflict once existed. New traditions replaced old grudges. New memories replaced painful ones. Children filled rooms once occupied by bodyguards and advisors. Laughter replaced suspicion. Hope replaced fear. One evening many years later, Evelyn discovered the original contract preserved inside a display case. The same document that once terrified her. The same document she believed had stolen her future. She looked at it differently now, not as a symbol of control, but as evidence of sacrifice. A father's desperate attempt to save his daughter. A promise between two families determined to protect what mattered most. The document had never been about possession. It had always been about love. The mystery that started on the day she was born finally came full circle. The answer had been hidden inside the promise all along. Not ownership, not destiny, not obligation, protection. And because of that protection, she survived long enough to build the life she truly wanted. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon and her family gathered nearby, Evelyn realized something extraordinary. The prison she spent years fearing had actually been the reason she was free. And in that moment, every secret, every loss, every sacrifice finally made sense. The promise had been fulfilled, not because it forced two lives together, but because it gave both of them the chance to choose each other willingly. And that choice became the beginning of everything that followed. The mystery was solved. The war was over. The future belonged to them. And for the first time since the day she was born, Evelyn Hart was exactly where she was meant to be